first flip, I had a swim bait on. First flip into this little hole on the river right off of an island. I hooked onto a monster walleye. And
Mm.
as soon as I saw it, it came up and it rolled. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's a 10-pounder.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Chasing Wild podcast, your home for all the best content on conservation, wildlife, and adventure. Our mission is to bring the wild to you. We're your hosts, Jake Johnson, Dean Dudzik, and today we have a special guest, our first guest on the podcast, my dad, longtime fisherman Bob Johnson. Dad, Dean, how you doing today?
Doing
Bob, go
good.
ahead.
Yeah?
Yeah, I'm doing good. Doing good, guys.
Sweet. So today we're just going to be, Bob has been a fisherman for 50 plus years. We're just going to be talking some fishing, maybe going over some of the changes that he's seen in his, 50 years doing it, being outdoors and stuff like that. So, but we got a fun episode. We're going to jump right in. So I'll lead it off. Dad, why don't you get us started with, how did you get into fishing, and, how is this something that has become a lifelong passion for you?
I don't know. I started when I was a little guy. I was probably 7 years old. I got three older brothers, and having three older brothers, obviously we're always doing stuff outside. I was always trying to hang out with my older brothers. And one day, one of my brothers said, "Hey, we're gonna go fishing. You want to go?" I'm like, "Yeah." And he goes, "Well, we're gonna be there for 8 hours." I'm like, "That's fine." Well, long story short, 8 hours later, I didn't want to leave. And, we were just at a little pond right across the state in Indiana. Lived in Illinois, and we fished a little pond in a park in Indiana. And I loved it. I absolutely fell in love with it. And then, went on Florida trips, my family when I was younger. And used to fish out in the ocean, right off the beach, fishing for whitefish with frozen shrimp. Did a lot of that. And I was only probably 9, 10 years old, wading out in the water. And then anytime, anywhere we could find anywhere to fish, when I was a young guy with my friends, we would go fish any kind of bodies of water. He was talking, they had like retention ponds. They were building a venture. It was like that era's time. It was like that time. It was like a Meyer back then, but it was called Venture. It was like a Kmart or something like that. And they dug a big hole to excavate and everything when they were excavating it, and it filled in with water, and we were out there fishing for whatever we can catch. Carp was a thrill back then. It still is actually, but
Do you remember?
So
Do you
yeah,
remember your first fish you caught that day you went with your brothers? If you caught anything that day,
I was a little bluegill, called
little
little bluegill,
bluegill.
right?
Okay,
Yeah, a little
Yep.
on
bluegill,
par. On par.
absolutely. So yeah, yeah, anything and everything when it came to fishing. When I was younger, I just fell in love with it. It was something about catching fish. My brothers, they were more into golf, and I was the one who just really had a passion for fishing. So yeah, it was fun.
Sweet.
Started at a young age and never stopped. So yeah, that's when I got going. With my brothers basically. So yeah.
Yeah. And then just to kind of, set the scene, is you as a fisherman. So you talked about doing some Florida fishing, but obviously, I know you are more of a freshwater fisherman. Why don't you go ahead and talk about some of your favorite fish to catch? Are you a bobber fisher? Are you more of a finesse fisherman? You shore fishing, wading? Just like what's your flavor? Because everyone's got a little bit of a different style to them.
Absolutely. Well, it progresses as you get older, I think, and everybody goes through their phases. It started out as a bobber fisherman, tight line fishing, basically when I was younger. But now, I love sport fish. I love freshwater. I love smallmouth bass is it
Yeah.
for me. Smallmouth to
Mm-hmm.
largemouth bass. Those are my true passions right now. Um, Come across some walleye, and I love catching walleye. There's a lot of big walleye in this area. So yeah, it can be a lot of fun. But yeah, for me right now, it's bass. I'm a bass fisherman. I love going for them. I love the thrill of trying to figure out patterns and stuff, and how to figure out how to get them.
Mm-hmm.
So smallmouth bass, yeah, that's my fish of choice right now.
Cool.
So
I have to say that smallmouth, I'll jump in here too. Smallmouth are also maybe my favorite freshwater fish to catch. You know, my brother and I will go fishing for muskie a lot when we're up in Wisconsin. Um, but that's a lot of hoping and praying that you're gonna get something. But I love catching smallmouth. They're so fun. I'll fish for smallmouth over largemouth any day. So they're super fun. They're always really fun to
hard
catch, and
fighters.
they're beautiful too. They're so cool to look at. I always am wondering what they're gonna look at. They're all different shades of like gold and browns and blacks, and they've got these blood red eyes, so they're super cool fish and they're really fun to catch. So I'm right with you with the smallmouth. They're awesome.
Yeah, they're a lot of fun. They jump hard fighters right to the end. You know, they say pound for pound, a bluegill's probably, believe it or not, the
Oh
hardest
yeah,
fighting fish I've heard. I've caught many bluegills, but you know they only get so big. But smallmouth are right there with the bluegill. They pound for pound, those smallmouth just keep digging. They keep
yeah,
right at the boat. They just don't give up. So yeah,
yeah.
they're
And
fun. They're
I
fun to
think I
fun to
think
catch.
from the fisherman perspective, so like I would say that you two, I mean, obviously you did, but Dean, in our conversations, just kind of talking, you two are both more into the technicalities of fishing, just kind of going out and the true like outdoorsman style. When I go fishing, it's so I can spend some quality time with you, but so when I like to go, I was always like, what's the biggest fish I can catch? You know, is it today? Is it a northern? Is it a catfish? Is it a big bass? You know, something like that. But I remember growing up, you always wanted to go for smallmouth bass, and I was like, but they're not as big. You know, just kind of like the naive me, young self. But no, I've
Well,
always
they can
appreciated.
get big.
And now that I am older, now when we go, I definitely appreciate the sport of it. So yeah. Um, and I know that. So let's jump into a topic that I think there can be some misconceptions on. So when we go fishing, you're typically more of a catch and release fisherman, right? So you're out there more for sport and not for as much of like keeping them, harvesting. But you do keep them. Can you go a little bit into the ethics of that? And is there a right and a wrong way as far as keeping fish goes? Because it's not all, I don't think, black and white.
Well, yeah, right. There's an ethics about it. There's a lot of old school guys who swear by eating, bass. When I was younger, before really catch and release caught on, you gotta understand, catch and release was something I got introduced to when I was probably in my early 20s.
Hmm.
Before that, I caught a bass. I mean, I brought many largemouth home. I caught bass out of Lake Okeechobee with my father-in-law. We brought them home to eat them, and it was, didn't even think twice about it. This is years ago. Um, Heideke Lake, when I first started going to Heideke Lake, I would keep a couple smallmouth, a couple largemouth. I would bring them home, and I was all proud of the nice bag I had.
Hmm.
Naive. I wasn't even thinking about, you know, if they were legal. Just didn't know. But the ethics nowadays, it's really has um, changed a bit. It's catch and release is caught on. A lot of fishermen will let smallmouth go, just for the sport of it. They're
What
sport
about, sorry to
fishers.
interrupt you, but real quick, what about just, so not necessarily smallmouth versus largemouth or, but just as fishing as a whole, because I know that you'll go out and you'll keep some walleye sometimes. But essentially, is there a right or wrong way to do it? So you're saying, small or bass in general are less of a fish that you would keep personally, but just catch and release versus keeping your fish in general. Like, is there kind of a, I don't know. Go ahead and
I
expand on that.
respect people that keep their limit.
Hmm.
If you're going to go out and fish, I mean that's part of it. As people fish to eat food, and I respect that totally. If somebody goes to a lake and they get their limit of three walleye, and they're of legal size, more power to you, man. Way to go, congratulations. It's just that's the way they want to be, and that's all good. I personally enjoy letting the fish go. I've had a couple experiences too with um, fishing with friends when I was younger in certain parts of the Kankakee River where we were tearing it up. We were absolutely tearing up the smallmouth. We were catching a lot of smallmouth bass in this one stretch. And a friend of mine kept a bunch of smallmouth because he had his own pond. And I was warning him, don't do that. They're not going to survive in a pond compared to the river. There's no current. It's just they won't thrive in a pond situation. It's just how they are. And he kept like 25 smallmouth, and he cleaned out a little stretch. And I'm telling you, to this day, they always reproduce and they always replenish, but to this day, that spot's never been the same ever since that happened. It could be coincidence. I don't think so. So there's a fine line between keeping fish, keeping your limit, and then poaching. A lot of people will
Hmm.
overharvest. They'll overharvest, they'll catch more than a limit, they'll eat whatever they can catch, and they bring it home and it's just wrong. And
Hmm.
unfortunately, I don't think there's enough DNR officers out there to police it. You know what I mean?
Have
To
you ever
control it. But
enforced it? Have you ever like kind of gone up to people and talked to them?
well, that's something else you got to be careful with because people get, yeah, oh yeah, I've voiced my opinion a few times. Um, I saw a couple guys on one of the lakes I fished who absolutely overloaded their live well with crappie, and they were big.
Hmm.
And I'm like, my gosh, you got a lot of crappie there. I mean, how many you got there? And they probably had, I think the limit for crappie is 15 at this lake per person. And they probably had about 60, 70 crappie for two guys. And they,
Jeez.
they didn't care. And they were big. These were back in the day when this is only like 3 years ago. This is Heideke Lake. And they were just
Wow.
slammed with crappie. And they had, and I kept scratching my head. I'm like, I was getting mad, but I didn't really say anything. I'm not one to tell them you got to let those fish go. It's not my job. So it's just
Yeah.
unfortunate that people are like that. Again, I respect people who want to keep their fish. Catch and release is for me. It's catch and release is where I is what I practice. I will, but again, I can be a hypocrite. I will keep a walleye here and there,
Hmm.
you know, to throw on if it's a legal size to throw in the pan and eat it up. But I would never ever keep a smallmouth bass. I always throw those back. So, and I have voiced my opinion on a couple different situations about people who are keeping the smallmouth bass out of the Kankakee River, and it kind of it'll backfire. So you just got to be careful what you say to certain people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Bob,
That's
can
just
I
how it
ask?
is. Absolutely.
Sure. Yeah. Can I ask you? So you've been fishing for how long now, you think?
Well, I'm 59. Probably started when I was 52 years.
Okay.
Seven. You know.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So do you even remember back then if there were regulations, as far as Fish and Wildlife, whoever setting the regulations on how many, what your limit is, at a specific lake or a river? Do you remember back then if there was a limit on how many fish you could
We
keep?
knew. Everybody knows there's most people know when you go fishing there's a limit and there's certain size. There's a lot of times there's a slot. You can keep a fish between a certain size. Like for instance, Kankakee River, smallmouth bass, they got to be 14 inches, I believe, or less. And you can keep up to four at that size, the 14 inches or less. I don't want to screw this up, and then you're also able to keep one that's 18 inches or greater. That's today. So back when I was younger, yeah, you're a little bit more naive when you're younger. You don't pay attention to that stuff. You don't respect the sport enough at that age. And as you get older, you learn to respect the sport a little bit more and pay more attention to the rules.
Sure.
So yeah, when I was younger, it was just catching for fun and the thrill of bringing it home and showing off your fish and eating it and whatever. But as you get older, you learn that that's not the way to go. You just got to be careful what you're doing
Sure.
because you just don't want to get. I mean, you can get your boat confiscated, you can get your tackle taken away. It's if you get caught doing stuff like that, if you go to Lake Michigan and Lake Michigan, it's enforced regularly out there. They will get you out there for sure. Perch. A lot of people poach on the perch. They keep
Hmm.
too many perch. And if
Hmm.
you get caught with too many perch in your live well, they'll give you a ticket. They hefty fine. So you gotta be careful with that stuff.
Yeah.
So,
Do you want to take one step to your left? You're starting to drift out of the camera just a
oh,
little
I'm
bit.
sorry.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Bingo. Right there. Um, so Dean is a hunter and a fisherman as well. He's an outdoorsman. Dean, what kind of fish do you like to catch? Are I know you said you guys went up for muskie. You like your
Hmm.
smallmouth bass. Would you say you're kind of the same ilk of like what my dad does?
Yeah, I think a lot of similarities. If I could kind of talk about when I started fishing as well, maybe we
Let's
could
hear
all
it. Yeah.
share. Jake, you could maybe take your shot after me too, and especially
Yeah,
with your dad
definitely.
here, I'd love to hear about your fishing stories together. But for me, I think I caught my first fish when I was 2 with my grandpa. My one grandpa was a lifelong outdoorsman. Unfortunately, he's not with us anymore, but he got me into fishing and hunting the outdoors from a nature, animals, wildlife from a really young age. Um, so I have a we have a picture somewhere at home of me sitting on our deck out in the backyard at our old house with me holding the bluegill I caught that day. When
Hmm.
I was 2, I was like in my diaper and my shirt and everything. So that was yeah. So I started at a really young age. And my grandparents growing up had a John boat, which is like, for those that don't know, it's a small boat, really
Aluminum.
shallow hull, and it's good for getting into really small, shallow waters. So it's great for like pan fishing and bass fishing, and it's just enough for like 2 adults and 2 kids. If we were to like take a time machine back and my brother and I are grown up now, it would not have been enough room for the 4 of us.
Hmm.
But as 2 kids with our grandparents, it was just enough room, and we would go fishing quite a bit, especially in the summers when we were off of school. Heideke Lake was a great spot that we would go to. My grandma hooked and got a big striped bass one time at Heideke, and I still remember I was a little kid and she handed the rod over to me, and I was a little bit intimidated because it was like the first big fish that I had ever like had the chance to bring in, and I reeled it in for a little bit, and then I was like, "Here you go, grandma," and handed it right back to her because I was like,
This is the real deal.
it was my
Too
first big
much.
fish, so I was a little bit intimidated and I kind of wimped out. But yeah, a few other spots we went to like Shabona Lake. That was a good one. We fished on the Illinois River a lot. We did Kankakee once or twice, but never spent a ton of time there. And then I'll round it off with a tradition that my brother and I started to partake in once we got a little bit older. Was we would go to a cabin up with my grandparents in northern Wisconsin every summer and spend the week there. And it's in Manitowish Waters. Bob, I don't know if you've heard of Manitowish Waters. It's up in
No, not.
yeah, it's up in Wisconsin by Minocqua. That's the nearest town. But it's great fishing up there. It's on a chain of 7 lakes, I believe, and that tradition still continues today. So now every summer, my grandma, my mom, my brother, and I go up to a cabin up at Fawn Lake on Manitowish Waters, and my brother is definitely. I think when I started hunting, I definitely moved towards hunting as my favorite of the two. So I'm not as big into fishing these days. We go at it pretty hard when we're up in Wisconsin, but besides that, I don't fish too much these days by myself. But when we're up there, we wake up like depending on the weather. If it's really cold, we'll wait till the sun comes up to go muskie fishing. But if it's warm weather, we're up before the sun rises and we're out on the boat to musky fish. And my brother will go at it the whole morning until we come back for lunch. I usually bring like a book or something, and after a while, I'll kick back and start reading or
Hmm.
whatever, looking at the loons and the eagles and everything. But that's our tradition every year is going up to Wisconsin. I've talked about it a few times so far on the show, but
Hmm.
um, that's kind of my background with fishing, and I absolutely love catching smallmouth. That's
Have you
that's
ever caught a good size muskie?
I've never caught a muskie,
Oh.
You
unfortunately.
never caught one. Okay.
I've never caught one. My brother has caught one up there in Wisconsin, and then he's caught a few on Fox River, so a few river muskie that were smaller. But the one he caught up there a few years ago was like uh 42-ish inches, so it was a
That's
decent
good
muskie.
size. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
good size.
it was a decent muskie, and they get much bigger up there. They can get up to like 5 feet, like a 60-inch muskie. So, um, it's not my favorite type of fishing to do because the chances of you getting a muskie are so low. But I prefer to catch like panfish or bass and even northern pike. There's a lot of pike up there. They're really fun. Um, yeah, that's what we do when we're up there. It's good fun.
It sounds like a good time, Dean. No
Oh,
doubt.
it's beautiful. And for me, like the fishing is just part of it, but I love the wildlife that's up there too. Like
Hmm.
the loons, they're beautiful. I love looking at the loons, hearing their calls. Their calls are amazing. Like anybody that's listening or interested in like birds and bird watching should look up loons calling. It's unreal. And then they have eagles everywhere up there, bald eagles, and you see their nests um dotted all along the side of the lakes, which is really cool. Their nests are absolutely massive. I don't know what to compare it to. Maybe the size of like a crib or something, like a baby crib, but it's
Yeah.
obviously like kind of circular, so they're
Hmm.
huge and really cool to see. We've seen porcupines up there,
Oh, that's cool.
otters.
Yeah, you've
So
seen otters up there?
we've seen otters. I couldn't believe it the first time we saw an otter.
That's
That
awesome.
was family of otters. That was unbelievable.
Hmm.
So all sorts of wildlife, and I love just looking at that stuff too. The fishing is part of it, a big part of it, but all the other wildlife up there is amazing as well.
Just the woods. The woods are even different. The trees, everything. You get a lot of birch up in
Definitely.
Wisconsin, right? A lot of birch trees.
Definitely.
So
Lots of birch, and the birch is beautiful. The woods up there are much prettier than down
yeah,
here. Yeah,
they are.
for
So
sure.
I would say, Dean, that we have a kind of a similar, style and maybe even kind of a similar upbringing. So, I mean, as far as right now goes, like I have recently thought about getting back into it a little bit, just for the
Hmm.
sake of, as you get older, life gets busier, you have less opportunities to get outdoors, and I would love to just, we have a local creek right behind my house, not too far. I would love to just pop over and just, kind of separate from all of it. But as far as going right now, I mostly go to spend time, with you, Dad. Just get out there, get on the boat, and I love the same thing. Just kind of getting outdoors. Like I don't have to catch any fish, and if you do
But
go
when
with,
you do catch fish, you're into it, Jake. You are
yes,
totally into it.
Yep.
well, okay. Here's the thing. I myself, I was just thinking about this too. Like if I were to go fishing on my own, maybe like Chris, my friend Chris and I, we went wading for his birthday, not this year but the last year, and we actually did decent, caught a few fish, but that's because you put us on the spots, we'd gone wading there before. But when we're in the boat, when I'm with you, all I have to do is I literally just you hook me up with your tackle, you get me all set up, and then I just watch what you do for a few casts, and then it's like, all right, jump in. So we don't bobber fish anymore, which when I was a kid used to be my favorite. You just toss the bobber out and you just look around, kind of, what's
Yep.
going on? Oh, look at all the deer
Yeah,
or whatever.
yeah.
But now it's definitely more finesse fishing, which is very rewarding. I like that. But just as
Yeah.
far as kind of me getting into it, my first memory was at Moni Reservoir. I remember catching a bass. My dad kind of set me up with, and I was a lot more into it when I was younger. One of those like little kid pulls, like the
Mickey
SpongeBob one or
Mouse.
Spider-Man, yeah, Mickey Mouse, whatever it was.
Yeah.
And I remember catching this bass in like the weeds and the lily pads. I remember my dad running over. He fell over a log because he was like, "Oh my gosh, he's got a fish!" And he was running over.
I
Um,
set him up, Dean. I set him up. He didn't
Oh,
know
I
it, but I
bet.
set him up.
Yeah.
he set
And
me
I
up in a
tell
good
him,
spot. Yeah, yo, go for it. Yeah, you remember it better than me. I was like 3.
yeah, Jake was a little guy and he wanted to catch frogs. So I'm like,
Ah,
oh, I mean, he was
Yeah.
loving the fact, and there's frogs obviously in Moni Reservoir. And so I put a big jelly worm on, thinking, all right, he's got a good chance of catching a bass if he doesn't get a frog. And sure, and I hooked him up. So he had his little Mickey Mouse pole, and I put a nice great jelly worm on there. And I said, just cast this out as far as you can, Jake, and just bring it back real slow over those weeds, and you'll probably get a frog. And I'm thinking he's probably going to get a bass. And I'm like 20 feet away, and all of a sudden here, Dad, I got a big fish, and I just start running because I knew right away it's on. He got a bat, and sure enough, I'm running over, and I trip over a log. I'm so excited. He caught a nice largemouth, a nice probably I don't know 2 pound, maybe 2 and a quarter, but that's still a good size
Wow.
largemouth
yeah.
on a jelly worm. So it's pretty exciting.
it's probably so memorable for me because like I don't remember much of the moment. I remember like Moni Reservoir, and then I remember the image of my dad falling over the log. So like that's what probably hit the cue. But yeah, no, that was a good one. I remember we caught a huge channel cat. I was probably like 8 or 9 at
Ooh,
that point.
Yeah,
We were
yeah.
Heideke
Heideke,
Lake.
yeah.
Yep.
Um, but yeah, just growing up, I mean, honestly, it's a lot of our best memories probably together, just getting out in the boat. And my brother and my sister fish with us too. You know, we'll go out. But um, yeah, and then the most recent, this past year, we went out a lot because I was, doing a lot of recording and just like drone footage and stuff like that. So it was a great reason to like get out there and be like, hey, I'll fish with you, but I want you to catch the fish because I'm trying to get the footage here. So, but
Yeah.
I've always loved just the feel of getting out in the boat. And, if you go out with my dad on any kind of fishing day, and he's like, especially now that we're adults, he's like, you really want to go? It's like, yeah, I want to go. Cause it's a 12-hour day. He's not like a 4 hours and done. He's like, hey, if
Packing a
you don't
lunch.
take
I've slowed
away,
down a little bit.
he's like, don't make me go home. If you're coming out here, I'm not leaving after 4 hours. Like this is my fishing day. But I love it because, like you, sometimes I'll just put the pole down and just kind of chill and look out and watch him catch fish. But it's
Yeah.
okay, this is actually gonna segue into another question I had. So what is it for you that allows you or that kind of drives you to get up at 4 a.m., sometimes, or even earlier, honestly, sometimes twice a weekend, all fishing season, and just kind of this like unrelenting force because, you'll be getting me up in the morning and I do love being out there, but, if I had it up to myself, I'd be like, no, I'm snoozing but, what is it that kind of like drives that passion for you? Because it is your passion.
Well, first and foremost, you got to love catching fish to do that stuff. I mean, obviously, to get up at 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning to get out to your favorite fishing hole is dedication. And I do it because I love catching fish. And every fisherman has heard this. Should have been out here last week. Should have been out here last week, right? Dean, you probably heard that. All the
Yes,
fishing
sir.
was great last week. Well, I figured, if you go like every weekend, you're bound to. I mean, obviously, some weekends are going to be better than others, but if you go often, you're going to run into those fish when it's prime time. And that's what I try to do is to try to, now that I'm older, my kids are growing up, I'm able to get out more. And I'll get out. And plus, if you leave it, early in the morning, you're back. I can be back sometimes by 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock in the morning. I don't have to fish for 10, 12 hours all the time. But I do with you, Jake. Anyways, so yeah, getting out there, get in your spot. If you get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock, you get to the spot first. You get to the lake first. Usually you're on the ramp, one of the first few people on the ramp. There's always a few better spots than others, and I like to get on those spots before the other guys. And just simply because I know I can catch the fish. Once you hit a spot, you spook a spot, you catch a few out of it, and the spot's usually, it'll slow down a bit. So
Is it
I
almost
like.
like is it almost like because we've been out days for 10, 12 hours and haven't caught anything or caught one or two fish, we've had very slow
Yeah.
days, but I see you just grinding cast after cast. Do you get like in like a zone, are you just totally locked in, or are you thinking about other things, kind of like
It's just the fact of trying to figure them out. You know what I mean? That's
hmm
that's that's
that's
for
the
me. That's where
sport.
it's the sport of figuring out, what lures they're biting and what they're feeding on. And sometimes it takes, unfortunately, it'll take, a whole day to figure. And usually it happens at the end of the day you finally figure it out. But it's the challenge of figuring out the spot, the technique, the pattern, what they're hitting on. Basically in our area, they're hitting on shad, crayfish. That's their big bait, bluegill. Anything that a bass would eat right now is a predator. They're predator fish. They're going to eat a smaller fish, crappie, and they'll eat. So just figuring out what the pattern is, and it's a challenge. And once you figure it out, it's exciting. You get it. When you get a good size, when I get a good size fish, it's a good time. I
Hmm.
enjoy it. I really do. And in our area, there's some really good fishing. It's Kankakee River in the fall can be outstanding in the fall, in the spring too. And some people nail them in the summer. Obviously it's an all year long thing. I personally don't like going to the river in the summer because it turns, in the area I go, it's more of a pleasure boat spot. A lot of people they go water skiing or go jet skiing and stuff like that. But if you go early spring, late fall, when a river gets cold, um, you can get some really quality fish. Heideke Lake, there's some monster
Oh,
walleye in Heideke Lake. Lake Michigan, some jumbo perch out there. Obviously, people like going for lake trout, brown trout, coho salmon. I don't really like going for. I mean, if I catch them, I catch them, but I don't go for them. There's some giant smallmouth. In fact, that's where the state record recently was caught, I believe, and is
wow.
in one of the harbors about 5 years ago. Some guy caught one at like 9 o'clock, almost 10 o'clock at night, right before the harbor closed. Caught a huge smallmouth. So yeah, there's some big
Hmm.
fish. Um, Braidwood opening
Oh
days
yeah,
coming up in like 50 days,
Braidwood.
Oh
March
Yeah.
yeah,
1st.
not that you're counting
Braid,
or anything.
well, it's this week or this year. It opens up on a weekend too, so it's going to be an absolute more of a madhouse than normal on Braidwood. So
What time will you get there in the morning, just so people get an
this
understanding?
year, because it's on a Saturday, I'm kind of a nut. There are people that are nuttier than me. They'll get there at 24 hours prior to opening. They'll get there if it opens up 6 o'clock in the morning on March 1st. They will start lining up the day before. They'll get in line and they're like number one, two, three in line. Seriously, like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. February 28th, 29th, whatever, the day before. So yeah, I usually get there at around, I don't know, 1:30 in the morning, get in line. I'm usually like 15, 16 in line and, just kind of kick back and chill and wait for the gates to open up. I'll take a little cat nap, lock the poles all up and everything inside the truck, bring them out when it's close to opening, start getting the Carhartts on, all the worm gear
Mm-hmm.
and launch that boat. And it goes quick. People are really fast about getting the boats on and off their trailers. Usually there's always somebody might run into an unfortunate situation with a boat problem on the ramp. So, but there's two ramps on Braidwood on March 1st. There's a north ramp and a south ramp. So there's a lot of accessibility. You can get out there two different ways. But yeah, going back to your question, Jake, I like getting out there bright and early. Early bird, you know, gets the worm, as they say.
Mm-hmm.
And I get out there early, and that's plus that's when the sun rises, that's some of the best fishing you can have right before the sun comes up. On like a normal weather day. You know, on some days it's better when the sun comes up and it starts warming up the water.
Mm-hmm.
But on a normal weather day, early morning, late evening, that's the time to be out there.
Nice.
And can't be out
Definitely.
there. And like Heideke Lake will shut down at dusk, as soon as it gets dark. Sorry, as soon as it gets dark. So you got to get out there before it gets dark on Heideke Lake. So
Yeah. I got one
Yep.
unless you got one, Dean.
Go ahead, Jake.
All
I'll go
right.
after you. Go ahead.
So I was gonna ask earlier. We were talking a little bit about, Dean was kind of bringing up seeing the loons, the wildlife, which is another thing that I love to do, especially when we went out to Canada a couple years ago as a family trip, just seeing all the wildlife out there. I was wondering because you've had 52 years around of experience, kind of being outdoors on the boat, on the water. Have you ever had I'm sure you've seen a lot of wildlife in your time, but have you ever had a situation or a moment that kind of stands out more than the others where, your fishing trip turned out to be more of like a wow, I'm seeing this kind of animal or I'm having this experience, anything like that?
well, going back to wildlife, I was in Canada and I saw a moose one time. We came around with a guide and we saw a moose standing there. It was
Amazing.
that was a thrill. You
In the
always want to
water
see
or
that.
on the shore?
It was like right there in the water, right, you know, I don't know, probably about a foot into the water, right on the shoreline, just standing there, and didn't get spooked or anything. It was kind of surprising. He kind of looked at us and we were like, oh my gosh. Saw a few black bear.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I will say that the weirdest thing I ever saw, and this has nothing to do with fishing, but I got to say this. It was when I was probably 12 years old. I worked at the Goodnow Grove Nature Center. I worked with a conservationist. His name is Paul Chenard. And we were out there bringing salt blocks out to an area marsh where a lot of deer were going to be. And as we're walking around, we heard this corruption going, a bunch of dogs howling. Like, what's going on? And Paul said, we got to get the heck out of here. Those are wild dogs. And they were. So he knew of a little cabin nearby. So we all ran. It was me and a couple friends of mine and two other two other people that we were working with, and Paul. And we all ran to this place. We got inside, and we had to basically hover down and be quiet until these dogs left. We were kind of freaked out,
Did they
wild
chase you?
dogs. They were coming. Yeah, they were coming towards us, and we got out of there. We just got away. We got into this cabin, and another situation happened where I was fishing a forest preserve pond with a buddy of mine, and we're down there on the shoreline. We're just casting, lures and stuff, trying to get a few bass, and a bunch of same thing, like about 3 or 4 wild dogs came running on the trail, and it was getting towards dark, and I actually got freaked out. I'm fishing out there. I'm like, what the heck is going on? How do you fend off wild dogs that are going to come at you? But fortunately, they kept going and left us alone. So in my experience of the fishing, I've seen a lot of wildlife, but for whatever reason, and out just being outdoors, like I
Mm-hmm.
said, when I worked at the nature center, um, the dogs, wild dogs,
What stands out the most?
yeah, those are the ones that I've seen a lot of bald eagle in this area, which is kind of cool on the Kankakee River.
Yeah.
Years ago, you would never see a bald eagle. Now
Yeah.
I'm fishing on the river or Braywood or wherever, and you see a lot of bald eagle flying around. It's really neat how they've come back.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It
that's
really is.
I remember you telling me that story too, like a fight or flight moment. You got to go. You're starting to fade out of the camera just a little bit again. There you go. Yep, just a reset. Go ahead, Dean.
Jake, do you want to share maybe favorite wildlife story out fishing with dad, or it can be another situation too, maybe in the local
You know what?
area?
I got one. It's not it is a wildlife situation, but it's kind of a goofy one. So we went to the Kankakee River, and I think it was me, my dad, and my sister, and we're out on the boat, and there was this little kind of like inlet. It went into like a little shallow. What's that spot, Dad? By that house? What would you call it? I don't know. It
Oh,
almost
you talking about the creek? You talking about the creek mouth?
yeah. It's like it's creek mouth exactly. And you could go back further, but we usually never went in there because if it's too low, you can't go past it. So
Mhm.
we went in, and I was like, go in there. I think I see some turtles. I was always interested in like frogs and turtles and stuff. And sure enough, there's a couple red-eared sliders on a log. And I'm like, Dad, get close enough. And I'm probably like, I don't know, 15, 14, something like that. Like, get close enough to this log. I'm going to jump on it. And so sure enough, we get close, and I jump on it, and the turtles all kind of run away. But I'm walking, I'm like walking on this log, I'm balancing. And then just out of nowhere, took a little slip, whoop, whoop, boom, I'm in the water. And, we've talked about our Baja episode, just being in the water in general freaked me out. And so, I'm like swim back, and now I'm covered and I'm soaking wet. Like, oh my gosh. And they're just cracking up. But that's one that stood out. I always love seeing the turtles. We went out to Canada. We did see the black bears, which is really cool.
What about when you scaled the wall in Canada, Jake? Remember that? You got out of the boat and scaled the wall?
Yeah.
That was crazy. That was crazy.
Yeah. I think I wanted
I
to take
shouldn't have let you do that. I was a bad dad for allowing you to do that.
No, by that time I was like, 19, so something like that. I was making my own
Do
decisions.
tell,
But
Jake.
yeah, well, we were, so we had a guide for some of it, but then we also had like little boats that you could rent like at night when we weren't like going out during the day for the hardcore fishing. So I remember we were doing more of a scenic, loop. We're just going to look at stuff, cast a little bit. Our whole family was out there, and the surrounding forest was just beautiful. It was that typical Northwest woods, forest, gorgeous. But we got up to the kind of like this like rock wall, and then you could climb it a little bit, and then you get to like the mossy, and then you get to like the ferns and stuff like that. It was beautiful. So we
Yeah.
got a little close, and I don't even know if I told you guys, but I jumped out and I kind of scaled the wall, and then I went all the way up, and getting down was a little harder than getting up. But
Yeah.
yeah, I'm always like kind of, it's like a game, like getting out of the boat while you're fishing is like like I did it, like kind of like the floor is lava thing. I don't know, but yeah, just always interested in that stuff. How about you, Dean?
You
Favorite
and you
wildlife?
enjoy.
Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say. I mean, you like getting on a boat and stuff like that. I know you enjoy wading,
Mm.
Jake. That's a whole element in itself. Wading like the river. That is a good time.
I
Definitely.
think I love the feeling of wading because when you get out in the water and like kind of like suctions up to your body and you feel the current and you're out there and it's, I don't know, you're way more a part of the experience. Like you're in
Exactly.
it, and when you catch the fish, sometimes they swim next to you or under you or something. You're like, oh my god, there they are. But yeah,
Mm,
I do really enjoy wading as well.
You ever
yeah.
go wading, Dean? You ever do that?
I have. I'd say honestly, every time or almost every time I've gone wading, it's just to like look for turtles and stuff like that. Maybe not to fish. I don't even have a rod with me, but just going like there's a river nearby. It's a small branch of the DuPage, and I remember I went in, I was wading through the water there as a kid and found a snapping turtle, a big snapping turtle, big common snapping turtle. And I found like the biggest stick I could find along the water. And I kind of scooped it up as best I could out of the water. And I was there with like a bunch of family from out of town and I was showing them all the snapping turtle that I found. And I had it like on the end of this big branch, but I don't necessarily do a lot of fishing and waders. I also don't uh, not into fly fishing too much. My brothers got into fly fishing a lot in the past, and for those that don't know, that's like I don't know how to describe it, but it's a really long, thin rod, and you wave it back and forth, and usually you're wading in the water to catch fish. And that's something that I never got into. Bob, I don't know about you, but um, that's another reason why people would wade. And I don't prefer fly fishing, so I'm not wading too often in the water.
I've done that before. I have a fly rod. I have fly fished before when I was younger. I actually went to Colorado with my parents, and I was able to go down. I believe it was Sun Valley. Oh gosh, I'm forgetting the name of the river. I want to say Sun Valley River. That sounds familiar to you guys. Anyways, yeah, I was able to fish the river and catch a few decent little trout. I think they were little brown trout.
Mhm.
And then I also caught a really nice rainbow as I got towards the mouth of it, as it came back and opened up into a bigger pool of it kind of opened up to like a lake. So
Nice.
that was on a fly rod. That was my fly rod experience. Plus I fished. There was a Lansing Sportsman's Club when I was younger, and we used to go out there and fish for bluegill with a little popper, kind of little popper,
Mm,
back and forth and
yeah.
pull some nice bluegill out of the sportsman's club. And again, we were just fishing for fun. You catch them, you look at them, wow, huge bluegill, hand size, good size
Yeah.
bluegill. Just let them go. So yeah,
Very
I
cool.
respect the sport, but I really don't do it much. I
Yeah.
basically like fishing off the boat,
I feel
just
like
Yeah.
too,
regular rod and reel.
if you're going to be really good at one, you're probably going to be pretty invested in one or the other. At least I would
Right.
feel like from an outside
Definitely.
perspective. Like I have a friend, Chase Halter. He's a big fisherman as well, but he's like really into fly fishing. Like he makes his own flies and everything like that. So I feel like it's
Hmm.
probably there's people who do both. He does both, but probably have more of like a specialty. Um,
Oh yeah, I mean, equipment's not cheap. Equipment isn't
mhm.
cheap. If you're going to invest some money into a fly rod, yeah, that's you know,
So I wanted to ask you, and you kind of touched a little bit on this in seeing some of the bald eagles and how it's kind of changed over time. How you used to not see them as much, and now you're seeing them more again. Are there any other changes that you've noticed in your 52 years, just kind of being an outdoorsman, being on the boat, changes you've seen with the rivers or the lakes, how had the seasons changed, like anything like that that you can kind of tie to, um, you know, you're out there all the time, so you're gonna be able to notice it a lot more than others who are just maybe seeing the news or whatever.
absolutely, absolutely. I have seen water levels drop in the last few years, on both lakes and rivers. Um, Heideke Lake, especially, I mean, the river, the Kankakee River, Heideke Lake has gone down, and there's structure now that used to be off, below surface. That's all, sticking out, rocks sticking out here or there, and you can't get to some of the spots like you used to. Um, it seems like the seasons are they kind of mesh together more. There's less of from when I was seems like when I was younger there was a winter. Everything froze up. A lot of the ice fishermen go out and ice fish, no problem. Now in the last couple of years, it's been hard to find solid ice to get on. This is the good year for ice fishermen. It's been pretty cold, but it seems like the falls now are taking the rivers. It like the water temperature. It takes a little bit longer for temperatures in the river to drop to where the fish are turning on to that fall bite. especially this year. You know, it was a terrible year for at least for me for fishing on that river. I finally got them towards the very end of November. You know, caught the nice quality smallmouth, the 3 pounders, the 18, 19, 20 inches that I've been looking for. Usually in the last few years, you catch them, in October, early November. This year, it took me all the way until the end of November to really find them. So, and that seems like the trend of late. It seems like the summers are getting really warm, and the winters are getting they're not as cold as they used to be. So
Mm.
there's a lot more algae on a lot of the lakes, a lot more algae in the river than there used to be from what I can remember. Um,
Would you say the
yeah,
rain
it's
patterns are different too, or is it more of the same?
yeah, the rain patterns. It seems like it doesn't rain as much. Obviously, when you get a drought, obviously there's not a lot of rain. So it's I don't want to be the global warming guy, but I think it's real. I've noticed it in the last. Again, I got back into fishing really as you guys got older, Jake. So I was able to once you guys grew up and stuff, and I was able to get out fishing more. In the last 5, 6 years, I've really noticed it has changed. Even the last 5 or 6 years, it's changed a little bit. So it's unfortunate, but it's still, it is what it is. I mean, we still have those heavy rains and the rivers fill up and they get flooded and there's flood stages and everybody freaks out, but they recede so fast now. It seems like they
Mm.
recede, they come down to normal levels. And I mean, you can look right now, there's a chart I look at, it's, it's, it's USGS. And basically I check out the temperature of the water of the Kankakee River before I even go there. And I look at the water levels and the flow. And you look at trends even from like the last few years. You can go back and look at last year's compared to this year's. You see a nice pie chart and a nice graph. See where the levels are at, and the levels have gone down the last couple of years on the river
Mm-hmm.
dramatically, in my opinion. And the rivers are just a little bit warmer than they used to be, from what I can remember. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's unfortunate that Mother Nature hits us the way it does sometimes, but you just got to roll with it.
Yeah, well, and so I kind of wanted to touch on that because, obviously, climate change is real. Everything's going on in the world. A lot of things are happening and changing. And I was curious, you're outdoors so much, seeing it, you're, interacting with these, ecosystems, these river ecosystems. And I know we've had conversations about it in the past, so I just kind of wanted to, touch on how someone who's out there every day might be seeing the changes. And then, yeah, kind of on the same thread, I had another follow. I don't want to, unless you got one, Dean. I don't want to, jump
No,
in.
Jake, go ahead.
All right. So, um, and this is something that more through kind of our conversations as well, I've picked up on. But would you say, I don't want I don't want to force you into like a yes or no situation, but how have your experiences as an outdoorsman, or would you say that spending so much time out on the water, out in nature, caring about fish, animals in general, would you say that it's made you more receptive to caring about some of the environmental changes and just maybe being a change instead of just another part of the circle, the wheel of never ending kind of, not, I don't want to say human destruction, but just kind of like ignorance, would you say?
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, you can look at just simple things like pollution. There's I don't know how many times, Jake, I've been flying down the rivers or lakes, and you see people just throwing plastic water bottles out of their boat. And I got to circle back, and I'll circle back and grab it, and get
Hmm.
it out of the water and stuff like that. But um, there's in Florida, obviously we're going to be moving to Florida in a few years, so there's a situation with the red tide that comes in. I don't want to get into technical reasons why it happens, but the red tide basically flows into the intercoastal waters and surrounding waters in the Gulf of Mexico and will nail, totally kill all the wildlife and knock an ecosystem down on several of the fish. They do rebound and come back, but um, it seems like it's happening more and more of late. Then maybe I'm just noticing it more because we're getting close to being there. But
Hmm.
it's stuff like that. It's kind of changing a little bit.
Yeah, and that's something I've always appreciated. Like as far as my endeavors of becoming a zookeeper and kind of trying to start this initiative to, again, be the change. Just seeing how receptive you've always been, just as an outdoorsman. Maybe you weren't someone who was like ready to, make all these changes and do all these things, or even know necessarily what's going on. But you've always been very receptive to, the things that we've talked about and the kind of messaging I've had. So, and I think that's one of the reasons I wanted you have you on. We just want to talk about fishing in general, have a nice little fun conversation. But I think these outdoor activities like fishing and hunting, they can get some misconceptions for maybe people think that like fishermen and hunters are out there, killing the wildlife, and maybe they are, but maybe if it's in a sustainable way to, kind of harvest those animals. But I find so often that a lot of these people are so much more in touch with nature and just like the outdoors in general versus, caring about something from behind a computer screen or just, maybe sharing something on social media. You've got so many of these people who are out there, and it's a good activity to kind of bridge the gap to, get you out there on the water, caring about, again, the natural world.
Yeah, I mean that's they've created slot limits for fish and stuff. Catch and release, like we talked about that
Mm-hmm.
before. Obviously, you're getting people are getting more aware of protecting, basically protecting what's out there for the next generation to come.
Yeah.
I want, obviously you're, you got Addie now, you got a little baby, and she probably want to go kind of go fish, and my granddaughter someday, and hopefully if everybody plays their part, and keeps everything clean and basically, careful about how many fish you harvest and so forth and so on. And it could be enjoyed by a lot of people,
Mm-hmm.
generations to come. You
Yeah.
know, it has changed. I will say, um, the generations, it seemed like when I was younger, we didn't have video games and stuff like that to play with. And
Mm-hmm.
we basically, that's probably another reason why I got into fishing so much is because it was an outdoor thing. And I just love being outdoors. Um, Nowadays, I wish more kids would get outdoors, and experience that. I think unfortunately, a lot of the younger generation is missing out on that because
Mm-hmm.
of the way that changes are happening, with video games and everything else. But
Yeah.
it is how it is nowadays. So,
Yeah.
I agree.
unfortunately,
Yeah. No, Bob, I totally agree. And if I could jump on, I think what you said about people taking care of the lakes and the rivers and whatever natural area they're in for future generations was really beautifully said, like very well said. And I think that's a big, big point when it comes to the awareness that most people have, I would say, these days when it comes to being outdoors and fishing and hunting. I would say that a lot of people these days, maybe more so than in the past, have that mentality, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully
yeah,
that continues growing so that, you know, generations like, you know, Jake has Addie and maybe taking her out fishing one day so everybody can enjoy it someday. And then I also love the point that you made about and it's a big, big point in my opinion about people losing touch with nature and the
hmm
outdoors.
hmm
I think that speaks to a broader topic about, you know, what you said about kids not being outside as much, whether it's fishing or hunting or hiking through the woods or whatever. And I think that speaks to a larger, what I would say, issue in my opinion. That's my opinion. That's not a fact or anything, but
right,
people, you know, they're losing touch with nature and they're also losing touch with maybe things like where does their food come from? Where have people got food in the past? How did they get it? All those things. And then just generally like what's going on outside. I don't think a lot of people know these days. They know maybe through watching the news or whatever they see on social media, but
Mm-hmm.
few people like those that spend a lot of times outdoors, like you, Bob, can really notice the changes as well as you guys. Because the more time you spend out there, the more aware you are of those changes. And there are few, like, I would say, watchers of the environment or like sort of stewards of the environment
correct,
as important as people that are in the outdoors, fishing and hunting and just walking around. It doesn't matter. You don't have to be fishing or hunting, just as long as you're outside. but they're great stewards for the environment because they're the ones seeing these changes and can bring those changes like to the general public and be like maybe to the local government or Fish and Wildlife, be like, hey, I've noticed these changes, or just talking about them with friends and family. So I think it's really important that people get out there to the outdoors, especially at a young age, because it really fosters that appreciation for the wildlife and the outdoors. And in my opinion, it's hugely important. So I'm really glad that you touched on that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Well said, Dean.
Yeah,
I
Yeah.
agree. I couldn't agree with you more
yeah,
on that.
well said. And I honestly think for myself too, like like my dad being a fisherman, being an outdoorsman, getting me and my brother and sister into it, like that was my gateway into the outdoors, catching frogs as a kid, catching fish,
Absolutely.
and then also, going to zoos and stuff like that. But no, I couldn't agree more. It's just an opportunity for, kids, adults, anyone to just get out and kind of appreciate, and and the nice thing is, like, you don't have to go all the way to Tanzania and do some safari. You can just go in your backyard, any little
Yeah.
pond, creek, what lake,
Yeah.
river, wherever it's at, and catch some fish, toss your lure in there. So well said. I like that a lot.
Yeah. And
Um,
it's
Go ahead.
also, sorry if I could just like
Oh
kind
yeah.
of round off that point with what you were saying. Like, it's also great family time, great time to spend with your friends. And that's something you can't get with just hanging, around the house and doing whatever you might be doing on the computer or whatever. Like going outdoors, it could be with, I'm sure Jake, you did this when you were a kid, and Bob as well, like going out with your friends in the summer and going to catch some fish or walk
Mhm.
around the woods and mess around, or then going on family trips like you guys have done with Canada. And then what my family and I do with Wisconsin, like it's really great quality time to spend with your friends and family. And I think that's equally as important as being aware of what's going on outside in the environment. So I think it's really valuable stuff all around.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Every
Those were my.
time I'll be walking my dog and I'll see a group of teenagers out there fishing, and every time it just makes me so happy. I'm like, you guys catching anything? Like,
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
yes, whatever. But I'm like, I love to see that kids riding their bike, putting their bikes on the ground, and then got the fishing
Yeah.
poles out.
Yep.
Love
I do
that.
too.
It's a um
It's honest fun.
it's honest, yeah, it's an encouraging
Yeah.
thing. It's like, oh, nice, kids getting outside again. I feel like I didn't see that for a while, but all right, so we're
Yep.
coming up on the hour mark. We could talk forever because you've got a million stories and experiences that
Mhm.
you had, and we've all had our own experiences. But I want to end off just kind of maybe doing a broad one. So, do you have let's say a favorite fishing experience or memory that comes to head, and if you don't have one, maybe a favorite fish that you've caught? Like, it doesn't have to be the ultimate favorite, just something that comes to mind when you think like, hey, this is, in your 52 years, what pops out when I say that?
I have, in 52 years, I have several um, great experiences, and it usually comes with family. My
Mm.
uncles, my dad, my brothers, taking you guys to Canada, years ago. It was a great time. Those are memories you'll never forget, But I do have one fish story.
Oh yeah, come on, you can't not. Let's hear it.
So ever since I was young, me and my buddies would say, we would love to get a 10 pound, 10 pound walleye, you know. Oh, you hear about that guy that caught a 10 pound walleye? Oh, really? Oh, they were like celebrity. They got a 10 pound walleye, Oh my gosh, how do you do that? And we always, when's it going to happen to us? Sooner or later, it's something, we got to get our fish, but just, we would always try to fish and, fishing and go at it. And it happened for me. I got lucky, and again, it's pure luck. I was on the river, and we were fishing a section of the river where I was there the day before, and I was catching some quality walleye, 23, 24-inch Kankakee River walleye. This is only, well, it was November 29th, 2021. I think it was the
Oh,
exact
recent.
date.
Okay.
It'd be, yeah, 2020, I don't know, maybe 2020. So, anyways. I went there the next day with my buddy. We went out there and we fished. We started fishing at 10 o'clock in the morning. Nothing, not even a smallmouth. And I'm like, what's going on here? I wasn't thinking about the fact that the day before I got there at 2 o'clock, and this was late November. Okay. So 2 o'clock in the afternoon is when it's getting towards evening on the river. And at 2 o'clock, I asked my buddy, what time is it? 2 o'clock. Okay, you know what? It's 2 o'clock. My gosh, that's when I started catching them yesterday. Let's go back to the spot where we had fished earlier that day and had no luck. And we went back there, and the first flip, I had a swim bait on, first flip into this little hole on the river right off an island. I hooked onto a monster walleye. And
Mm.
as soon as I saw it, it came up and it rolled. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's a 10-pounder. And my buddy grabbed the net, and it happened so fast. I got on video, the whole thing. It was pretty exciting. He netted it. I actually helped him grab the net. It was pretty hefty. I lifted that net in, and he picked it up with one hand. I grabbed the other hand. We dropped it in the boat. The fish weighed 10 pounds, 12 ounces on the Kankakee River. It was a true once in a lifetime fish. I don't think I'll ever do better than that. If I do, I'm really lucky. But 10-pound, 12-ounce walleye, weighed it. He took several pictures, marveled at it, put it in a live well for about an hour, kept looking at it, bringing it up, and I finally let it go. I released it. I let that old walleye is probably, I don't know how many years, a 10-pound, 12-ounce, probably 20, 25 years old, maybe. I don't know. But it's an older fish. It's an older female. It's a big, big walleye, and it was a once in a lifetime fish. And yeah, that's the one fish, mainly because we always talked about catching that 10-pounder, and it happened. It was pretty exciting when
Yeah.
it happened. It happened so fast. Like, I cannot believe we just caught a 10-pounder. It was pretty cool. So
And you
that's
got to
the
put
one
in the
fish.
you got to put in the time to get one of those fish,
Yeah,
and even a muskie. I know you got some muskie stories, and you caught one last year, 2 years ago. But that's what your dedication of going out all the time, earns you.
yeah. Caught a 39-inch muskie out of Heideke fishing for smallmouth
Nice.
out of nowhere. 39 inches. That's
Yeah.
that's a pretty big muskie. I had a heck of a time trying to get that muskie in my smaller net. I'm using a smaller net to hoist up these smallmouth. So I had to grab the tail of the muskie and then grab the head and just lift it over the side. And I couldn't believe this muskie that I just caught out of Heideke Lake. And they get bigger than that. Supposedly the state record is swimming around in that lake. So
Hmm.
somebody will catch the state record someday out of that lake, hopefully soon. So we'll see. But
Rip.
yeah, that was pretty exciting. That was just like 4 or 5 months ago when I caught that muskie. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, that was
So
cool.
yeah. But the walleye has to be the one that stands out, I guess.
Cream of the crop. No, definitely.
That
I want to
was a
see.
big fish.
I want to see a picture or video of that, Jake. You got to send it over to me, maybe, because
Right over my
my
shoulder.
brother and I. Yeah.
You got it right there.
Please. Oh, I can
That's it
see it
right
in the
there.
back. Yeah.
That's
Wow.
it right there.
That looks like a muskie from back here.
Yeah, it's a big fish. Now you gotta hold it out, but still, that's a
Oh
big
my
fish.
God. Because I get so excited about that because my brother and I, for the life of us, do not know how to fish for walleye. So maybe we could get some tips from you
Slow.
sometime because
Yeah.
we are terrible at fishing for walleye. We're so bad. We don't know what we're doing.
Yeah, you got to really slow it down for walleye. Slow it down.
Okay. Yeah.
I feel like too we could do, obviously the podcast is going to go in many different ways and shapes and forms, but if I'm sure there's a market for people who want to know the secrets. This is more just like a storytelling time, kind of getting to go over some of your experiences, but I'm sure we could do a technical episode too, kind of going into the ins and outs of some of these freshwater fish. But Dean, do you have anything else? Dad, anything else before I wrap us up? Any concluding thoughts or anything?
No, I think we're good.
Yep.
Thanks
Dean?
for having me on, Jake. Thanks, Gene. Dean, I appreciate that. Thanks for having me on and being able to share some stories with you guys.
Yeah.
Absolutely. My only concluding thought was, Bob, I'm so happy you came on. You're our first guest onto the Chasing Wild podcast. I know how excited Jake and I were to have you on today as our first guest. This has been a blast. It's definitely been the most fun episode, I would say, so far. It's a totally different dynamic having somebody on the show with us. And Jake and I love talking to each other on the show as well, but having somebody else on has just added a whole different side to it. So, Bob, we really appreciate you coming on, and this has been an absolute blast. This hour has just flown by for me. It feels like 15 minutes. If you told me, Jake, that it's been 20 minutes, I would believe you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And that's what we were talking about before we were in it, and I was like, don't worry. Once you get going, you won't even be thinking about the time or anything like that.
No.
But yes, Dad, Bob Johnson, everyone. He was our first guest on the Chasing Wild podcast. thanks for coming on, sharing some of your stories and experiences with us. We really appreciate that. And I am going to get that footage from you, get some of your photos, and I'll pop the walleye footage in at the end. I'll probably have to
You're gonna have to
bleep.
edit.
I was like, I'll probably have to
Awesome.
bleep out a few words. I think I've seen that video, but that's okay. We got editing for that. You know,
Do some double editing. That's
it's the
double editing
excitement.
right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, but we'll pop in some pictures from your experiences and that video in at the end, because you know you've got so many great ones. I feel like every weekend you're catching something great. But thank you for joining the show. I hope everyone enjoyed this episode. Again, our first guest on the podcast, and this is where we're trying to go with this, having people on so that Dean and I can just have more of a conversation, dialogue, kind of pull some of the experiences and stories and perspectives from other people. So appreciate it. Thank you all for listening. Please like and subscribe to the channel. Leave your comments. We'll be sure to have Bob here checking in, seeing if he can respond to people too. So that's all for this episode, and we will see you next time on the Chasing Wild podcast. Peace out, everyone.
Thank you.